Hello, welcome to day 2 of the International Pure Conference of the Americas, Europe, and Africa. My name is Tina Moyer, and I'm Senior Director of Industry and Partnerships, and I will be the moderator for track 2 today. We're going to kick off the day with a panel discussion on exploring the CRIS-IR Continuum. You can submit your questions to the speakers throughout the session by using the live QA chat button. It's either on the bottom of your screen or to the right of your screen. And time permitting, we'll cover all the Q&A at the end of each presentation. I encourage you, since this is a panel discussion, to please put your questions in throughout the panel discussion because there'll be a lot of questions that the panelists will be going through. Now I'd like to introduce you to the host of today's panel discussion. Davina Erasmus is the Director of Product Management at Pure, and Shandon Quinn, the Vice President of Product Management for Digital Measures. Davina and Shandon, over to you.
Thanks, Tina. Just a small clarification. Shandon's on digital comments, not digital measures. Thank you, Tina, and welcome everyone to Exploring the CRIS-IR Continuum, which is a panel discussion around the topic of using your CRIS as an IR or using a specific IR to deal with use cases you have that would require you to work with an IR. The objective of today's session is to really share experiences and knowledge and to start the conversation around what kind of features and functionality should we be thinking about having in the CRIS system, and when do we think about, or when should we think about working together with an IR. We have a great group of panelists today. So Shandon, would you like to just introduce us to the panelists?
Indeed, Davina, we do have a wonderful set of panelists with us today. First, Adrian Ho of the University of Kentucky, who is the coordinator of digital scholarship there. We also have Dr. Leigh Stork, who is the research services lead at Aston University. And we have Damon Querry at the Research Information Management Systems Manager for University of Edinburgh. And we'd love to get the panelists now involved. In turn, could each of you please give a short introduction of yourselves to tell us briefly a little bit more about your roles. And then as you're doing so, to set the context for the audience and share the variety of perspectives that we're going to be bringing in here, could you tell us which institutional repository system your institution uses and what CRIS or RIM system your institution uses? Adrian, could we start with you?
Sure. Adrian Ho at the University of Kentucky. I am coordinator of digital scholarship. So my part of my main responsibility is to oversee the operations of the institutional repository. So here my library uses digital commons from bpress. So it is a hosted service from bpress. So we have been a bpress customer for over about a decade, because I think it started before I joined this library. For the CRIS system, I think the university is still kind of working on setting it up. We are rolling it out, and I'm not directly involved in that because it's run by the Office of the Vice President Research. So, but I did have a chance to work with my colleague, Dr. Baron Wolf. He oversees the rollout of the system, of the CRIS system. So one thing that we talked about was that, well, because we have got faculty members, publications in the institutional repository, so we want to make them available through the CRIS system. So we started talking with Shandon, and thanks to Shandon's and his colleagues, now there is the integration between the CRIS system, that is Pure, I should have said. There's the integration between Pure and digital commons, and so there's a way for users, the profile users, to pull metadata from the institutional repository into Pure.
Great, thanks, Adrian. And over to Leigh.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Leigh Stork. I'm the Research Services Lead at Aston University. So my role is to be a co-administrator of Pure, which we use as our CRIS, but I'm also the manager for our 2 institutional repositories, which are both e-prints. So one repository is for our publications, and the other repository is for our data collection. Our publications repository is connected to Pure, but our data repository is not.
Wonderful. Thanks. And Damon.
So my name is Damon Querry. I'm the Research Information Systems Manager at the University of Edinburgh, based in the library, which is part of our Information Services division. We look after many research information systems on behalf of the university, the main ones that form the core of our research information lifecycle, including our CRIS system, which is Pure. And for one of our many institutional repositories, we use the Pure portal bolted onto the front end of the Pure backend. So that acts as our institutional repository, but in effect, it is just one of many repositories of information that the university has, including others in my wider area of library research support, which are dedicated dataset repository and a Graham literature archive as well. But there are other bit of the library areas which you could also describe as a repository of some.
Thank you, everyone, for that. Maybe then to just jump straight into that more detailed question of, so what are the use cases that you're trying to fulfill by using the CRIS? And I would also just bolt on the IR at the same time, because I think this is probably going to flow between the 2 systems. But what are the main use cases that you see you need to use the CRIS and or IR systems for? Shall we start maybe with Leigh this time?
Yeah, sure. So for us, the use case is that we don't think that the Pure portal fulfills all of the needs that an institutional repository has. So this includes things like long-term preservation, DOI minting capabilities, other things like the metadata specs that we need. In the UK, we're also very obsessed with open access policy mandates. And we have a lot of technical requirements around these policy mandates that we need to comply with. And again, that we just don't see that the Pure portal fulfills those needs. So we do very clearly see a use case for needing a separate institutional repository that meets all of these key technical requirements.
Okay, may I just ask one question as well, because you say you use 2 e-prints. Can you just maybe elaborate on why you chose to do 2 separate repositories in that way?
So partly it's to keep the dataset repository separate, because it has the storage space needed for that is quite significantly bigger than the publications repository. You know, if people have like terabytes of data that they need storing and things. And so we have a long-term preservation tacked onto the back end of that it can be called on when needed, rather than just sort of sitting there taking up storage space. The other thing is that we have DOI minting specifically for our data sets. So that's a plugin that is on the dataset repository with a specific DOI minting capability.
Okay, great. Thank you. Adrian, would you like to go?
Sure. So, as I said, the repository has been established about a decade ago, so it's been, going. And for the CRIS system, it's relatively new when compared to the IR. So, and I wasn't aware of the portal part. So, and as I said, I am not really involved in the setup of the CRIS system. So I'm not sure exactly, how it is set up at this point. But what I can say is that for the IR, we have been using different parts of the digital commons system. So part of it is about journal publishing. So we are using Digital Commons as the platform to publish open access journals that are based at the University of Kentucky. So I I'm not really familiar with the CRIS system, but my assumption is that it doesn't offer the kind of editorial management system that is available from Digital Commons.
Okay.
And Adrian, you did mention that there was a faculty scholarship that now with your adoption of Pure, you're interested in moving from one side to the other. Could you tell us a little bit about that use case and how the IR was used to build up that collection?
Sure. So, you know, in a CRIS system, faculty members have their profiles, and for certain publications, maybe they are available from the IR. So we are hoping that maybe the CRIS system can serve as an additional avenue to provide access to the content that is available in the IR. So that's why you know, my supervisor and Dr. Baron Wolf, we came together and then we approached Shandon. We were saying that, you know, it would be great if we could harvest metadata from the IR to the CRIS system, because, you know, it wouldn't make sense to rekey all the metadata. So Shandon and his team started working on the integration between Digital Commons and Pure, and I think recently they got it done. And Dr. Baron Wolf, you know, tried it out, and then he was able to pull the metadata from the IR into Pure. So it is, you know, really great that you know, we can use that system. I mean, the integration to, you know, just provide another way for people to discover the content in the IR.
I'd like to circle back just now. I just want to give Damon an opportunity as well to just give us a bit of an insight into the use cases that you're using Pure in the IR way as well to fulfill at Edinburgh. And then I want to circle back to some of those points there that I think also Leigh picked up on. But Damon, please, can you elaborate a bit on the use cases that you are using it for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the use cases are pretty much the use cases that everyone, particularly in the UK, uses a CRIS for. Just helps us manage our current research outputs, helps us achieve things like submissions to a REF exercise and other national assessments, helps us manage the management information based on the outputs, the research outputs of the university. Build some intelligence, just look at what the university is currently doing. For the institutional repository, I mean, we've used Pure at Edinburgh for, I think, just about 10 years now, and doing a bit of archaeology in preparation for this, because this is before my time, is to understand why we elected to use the Pure portal, which was hosted at the time. It's unclear. I think we looked at something like a connector out to DSpace, but as far as I can see, the use case for having a portal in the first instance is just the discovery layer, is making this available to the world, showcasing our research. Doesn't seem to have gone into detail around digital preservation and other issues, which I've, over the past 18 months, 2 years, become more acutely aware of. That actually, I think we've got a problem here with our choice and the functionality that's available to us. I think it needs to do more. There are more use cases now that we need to address with our portal than we've perhaps had in the past. The other use case is possibly just standard profiles for academic researchers, as well as that discovery list, is discovery of our outputs as well as our people. Although there are tensions there, as there will be at other universities, between local profiles versus profiles in a central system, and that's nothing new across the sector. So yeah, I think those are basically the use cases that we see within Edinburgh for the CRIS and the IR.
Okay, because you talked actually a lot about just the idea that I was going to pick up on as well, that both Leigh and Adrian also picked up on, is that question of how to make the content available to the world, right? So how to expose it to possible consumers, to make sure that the research is accessible, and specifically also openly accessible, so that you can get access to the actual research itself. And Shandon and I, we have conversations quite often around the overlap between our systems, and just where do you do what, and how do we kind of make decisions around where to send which content and things like that, or who should be showcasing which part of the content and things like that. When we're looking at this on the Pure side, we're often looking at how an IR very specifically showcases research output as an example. And there is a very different way in which research output is displayed, rendered in an IR system than it is in something like Pure. My feeling is it's got to do with that underlying use case. The fact that often in Pure, it's about showcasing the institution, the researchers. In the IR, it's mainly about making sure that content is accessible. And I wanted to ask all of you, do you recognize that? And if you look at what you're seeing out of your own specific IRs versus what you see coming out of Pure, where do you see that kind of, not so much the overlap, but the synergy happening? So how should we be looking at this in terms of making sure that the two systems are strengthening your message and helping you to get what you need out there? Shall we start maybe with you, Damon? I don't know if you want to have a go.
I think something I've struggled with in preparation for this session as well. You can't, Pure is an IR by itself, let alone the portal. There is a repository of stuff that sits within Pure. But that's seen at the back end by the people who use the Pure application rather than the people who are outside the university who see the Research Explorer. So I wonder whether some better clarification of exactly what a CRIS system is and what a CRIS system does, and what an institutional repository is and what it should do is needed here. I mean, I guess the portal grew out the back of the CRIS system development in the early days of Pure, so there is close connection between those two things. I was looking at an OCLC EuroCRIS survey that was done a couple of years ago. The vast majority of people surveyed seem to use a research information system or a RIMS or a CRIS or whatever you want to call it. That was also their default repository. So I wonder, particularly some conversations I've had around the sorts of things we now need to do with a repository, the sorts of information we now need to make publicly available, whether actually there needs to be better separation between what we understand to be an institutional repository, a public-facing institutional repository, and what we understand to be a back-end research information management tool.
I certainly have ideas on what you just said, but I want to maybe just wait and see if Adrian and Leigh want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I think institutional repository, it's the point is to make information or outputs open access, whether it's publications, whether it's theses, whether it's data sets, whether it's practice-based research and things like that. So the whole point that we see our repositories for is about making the information publicly available. Whereas for us, the CRIS is very much, it's the back end. It's all the other bits of information relating to that. And we do drive our researcher profiles from Pure, so they don't necessarily have other web pages. So that's one of the other uses that we have for Pure. But we do, draw a line between what we use the CRIS for and what we use the institutional repository for. And the repository for us has, very clear purposes. It's for preservation, it's for discoverability, it's, for compliance. And, so to meet all these targets, we have to have the technical specs in place. So, that is why we won't move away from our repository anytime soon, because the repository, tend to be much more agile and dynamic and sometimes a bit more forward-looking in terms of keeping up with the best practice and things. So beyond compliance, but actually, proactively trying to do what's best to make research publicly available.
Yeah, I agree with Damon and Leigh. So for me, the repository, it is more like a central clearinghouse, and it is for storage and discoverability of the research and scholarship from the institution. People nowadays, they use Google a lot, and hopefully by using whatever search engines they use, they can find content from the IR. And for the CRIS system, I think the major focus is about tracking faculty members' research activities. I can kind of see that these two systems are kind of complementary in the sense that one focuses on the researchers' activities and achievements, and then the other system, that is the IR, it will provide access to the outputs from the researchers' activities. So yeah, I think they are kind of complementary to each other. And then in my case, Digital Commons, because it can be used as a platform to publish open access journals, so it is a special kind of use that is unique. And as I said, I'm not sure if this functionality is available from the CRIS system.
So Shandon, I just wanted to give you an opportunity maybe to also jump in here. I have ideas as well, but I just wanted to see if you wanted to say something.
No, it's a wonderful set of perspectives that everyone's already shared about the use cases. And of course, many of them, as someone who manages a institutional repository system, many of them obviously resonate with the things that we think about with Digital Commons, the dimensions of the IR for that we can add additional value and functionality and continue to ensure that the library, which is most of the time managing the IR, is having all of its needs served. So I'm also interested in diving into some of these in more detail, Davina, but why don't we go first where you were thinking of driving the discussion?
Well, no, I just wanted to say what has always struck me with Pure as a CRIS versus the conversations that Shandon and I have around an IR system is that on our side, we provide the ability to bring the full text in, for example, out of necessity more than anything else. For customers who want us to then have that storage in there, we do have the ability to store it. But our main objectives, at least when we're looking at how we're putting functionality into Pure, is to help to curate the metadata and to be able to feed the downstream processes, right? So push that content through to assessments and evaluations, reporting, portals, things like that. So being able to use it to manage operations systems. And what strikes me always is that the conversation on the IR side is very much around that, being able to store the actual content, the scholarship, basically. And I've been hearing often recently the name or the word collections. So I'm very interested to hear also about how that works within the institutions, and just where's that use case coming from, and are you then, how are you using the IR systems that you're using, and what are the requirements around those, that use case as well? So maybe we can jump into that, or otherwise, Shandon, if you had something before that.
I think I'm happy to jump in. I mean, we do have a number of library collections, some of which are these other repositories that are exposed to a worldwide audience. I'm aware that the current research information systems repository kind of sits in isolation from some of these other richer sources within the rest of our library. We have done a little bit of work trying to tie up our dataset repository with our Pure to share metadata between these two things. So the datasets aren't deposited within Pure, they're deposited within a standalone repository, but they are described within our Pure, so we can link them up to the rest of the research that's going on, so that we connect it to the projects, the awards, the outputs, anything else that's part of the awarded sum that's created this bit of research in the first place. We also, our Grail Literature archive is used to store our theses. That's a bit of a historical thing, because we had a Pure, a self-hosted Pure portal which couldn't display student records, so couldn't display student theses. We're now on the cloud portal, so we could look to smooth over some aspects of that work. But I'd quite like to be able to get to a place where actually the institutional repository that exposed our current research was just part of the information provided by the university, seen as a whole with our other collections. So I don't know, things like we've got some rich collections around old books, pictures, paintings, sculptures, all sorts of things, and they all exist in their own little collections database, and some of those are exposed to the web, but trying to link those up to our current research might be quite interesting. So if a piece of research not only was produced by a bit of funding brought into the university, but also used an element from one of our collections, that might be quite interesting to create those cross links outside of Pure. But it strikes me as quite a difficult task to be able to do that. I was quite, just to go back to something Leigh said, I was quite taken by something Leigh said about drawing a line between Pure and the institution repository. Because the Explorer is bolted onto the back of Pure, we don't have that separation. I wonder whether that separation might actually be quite useful, a useful thing to have. Pure is just Pure. Whether it's the back end or the front end, but actually some separation there might help us get different messages across for different aspects of the service.
Leigh, maybe if you could go into some description around what that line is and how you work around that between the two systems.
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way to identify the line is so what we display on our Pure portal is sort of everything, I guess. So, things that are made publicly viewable in the back end of Pure, they get translated through into our Pure portal. But then the only things that get sent across into our ePrints repository are full text items. So sort of our workflow is that if theses are a slightly separate matter, but for research outputs, if there isn't a full text, it doesn't go into the repository. We don't want skeleton records in the repository because that's pointless. So the line, I guess you could say for us, is that if it's got a full text, it goes into the repository, because that's, it's to make it open access. It's to, make the documents more discoverable. It's to comply with REF. It's to comply with Plan S funders and UKRI. So, and so again, we can drive the decision making around, well, we have to have reocs for UKRI. Therefore, our ePrints has to get reocs. So we don't have to worry about trying to get Pure to adopt reocs. We can just say, well, ePrints has it, so it's fine. Don't worry about it. So it's a bit easier to comply with everything, all the repository requirements with ePrints, because like I said, it's a bit more agile, and it's just a bit easier to work with, I think. So that's a line.
The other, sorry, not in again. The other thing that's come to my attention in the past few years is digital preservation, and trying to do that in Pure, I think, might be quite difficult. We do self-host Pure at the minute, so we've got access to the file store that the files are stored in. We did look at running a particular tool across our file store to give an assessment of the files that are in there. But actually, looking at, there are elements of the UKRI open access policy that it doesn't, I think it's in Annex 2, but it's not specifically about our institution repositories. I think it's talking about publishers' platforms. But that does talk about robust digital preservation processes, which I'm not entirely sure we have at the minute or can have at the minute using Pure. So perhaps we need to do something similar, like look at pushing stuff out to some other repository to do those sorts of processes if we're going to be bound by certain policies to do things like digital preservation.
I remember at a UK user group, I think the last one that we actually had in person a while ago, we did, or someone brought up the fact that there wasn't an integration with Pure for any of these long-term preservation systems, Preservica, Archivum, Archivematica, so there isn't an integration at the moment. So if people, do want to look into long-term preservation for theses, for, research outputs, for data sets, like that facility isn't there with Pure at the moment. So you do have to go the route of having a connector, and then the connector has a plugin to one of these preservation systems. So we have talked about it a while ago.
Mm.
Adrian, I saw that you maybe wanted to say something on this.
Well, in my case, it is, as I said, the Pure system at my institution is still kind of being set up. So I am not sure if the portal part is being used, but at this point, I can say that from the library's perspective, the repository, the IR, is the place to, collect and provide access to the research and scholarship from the faculty members here. And we do use the Amazon cloud to do, multiple backup. And the library is now working on a long-term preservation policy so that, down the road, we'll do more to make sure that there is, the preservation of the content in the IR.
Sorry, Shandon, continue.
I wanted to circle back something to you, Davina said. It sounds like besides preservation and storage, which may be a very distinct dimension against which CRIS functionality and utility might not serve the needs fully of the institutions and the content that needs to be stored. Davina, you mentioned something which was users can curate metadata in Pure as perhaps submissions are added or things flow in. And as I hear our panelists talk about the different systems they're using, I think there's a question in my mind, which is where should metadata be curated, and across the different systems, where do you see that happening? Where do you believe it should happen? And what are the distinctions between using the CRIS as the place to curate and metadata versus the IR or other repositories? Perhaps, Adrian, we can start with you and then go back around.
Again, from the library's perspective, we curate metadata in the IR, but I think one important point is that we want the interoperability between different systems. So it doesn't matter, where the metadata is, as long as systems are interoperable, then we can easily import metadata from one system to the other. So
got it. Okay, so perhaps it could occur anywhere, but you're happy for it to, as long as it's replicable to other systems.
Yeah,
that's important. Leigh, what about you?
Could I just quickly ask Adrian one question in between, just on the, is there a difference then in who is putting the content in? Is that maybe something that in a way affects where you would be putting the metadata in?
That's an interesting question. I think, again, from the library's perspective, I think, because we have catalogers, we have metadata specialists, so we have an understanding of, what metadata is important, and also there are different standards that we can apply to when creating or, ingesting metadata. So from my perspective, I think, library is well suited for the curation of metadata.
Thank you. Sorry, Leigh, please go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah, so we use Pure as our sort of metadata source, and that's where we update, because we've got lots of integrations that will sort of flag when there's metadata updates. We've got the JISC publications router that tells us when there's new publications and other things like that. So we see Pure as the CRIS as sort of the source of truth for the metadata. And once we update the metadata, we press save, and it pushes that through the mods file through into the repository, and it automatically updates the repository record. So there's a couple of things that we can do in the repository that we can't do in Pure, which sort of we have to do in the back end of the repository, things like minting DOIs, which we can then add to the record and then add back into the Pure record. So that's how we manage our metadata.
And Damon?
Because we are basically just using Pure, the metadata for the core research outputs is curated within Pure by a mixture of admin staff and academic staff. We do share metadata from things like our dataset repository. We ingest that via the bulk import once a month for newly created records. But the vast majority of the metadata curation, entering, maintenance, the integrations with other external third-party systems all happens within Pure itself.
I think because we are actually, it's surprising how fast the time flies. We've got 4 minutes left, and I think just to make sure that we've asked some of the questions that have come through from the audience, because there's been quite a few, I'm just going to post some in. So the first one is, Leigh, you spoke of having researcher profiles derived from Pure, but having output surfaced on your IR. From an academic's perspective, do you have one place they upload or record their whole research story and you then reuse that information in various systems? Or do you manage to have them updating various systems?
So the ideal for us should be update once. We don't want researchers having to update various systems constantly. So we tell them to put information in Pure. We also have a largely, I lost the word, not moderated. It will come back to me. Mediated, that's it. We have a largely mediated service. So we will pull in records from Scopus, from just publications router, from various other sources, and we'll try and do as much for our researchers as we possibly can in the library. So that then, and also we can pull things in from ORCID too. So we tell them Pure is again, the central source of truth for their profile. They can update their information, their interest, if they're taking PhD students and things like that. So all of that will get pushed through into their portal profile, and then any full text publications will get pushed through into our institutional repository.
Okay, great. So the next question is, how does your IR, if separate from Pure, integrate with Pure, and what is the public-facing interface? So maybe just Leigh and Adrian, because sorry, Damon.
Yeah, so we use the Pure connector to connect them, and so that's done using the mods files on the individual research output records, and then there's an XSLT, which you can modify so that you can have the information that you want displaying on your external repository. So you can tweak things a little bit so that you can show deposit dates, theoretically, acceptance dates, things like that. So it is a sort of a standard thing that Pure has, which is to have a connector.
Adrian?
I think in Pure now there is, or at least for our instance of Pure, there is a way to select the IR as the metadata source. And so once you have done that, you can just pull metadata into Pure. And also in the IR, there's Digital Commons. There is also a way for me to select Pure as the source of metadata and then pull the metadata into the IR. So the harvesting goes both ways.
Great. Then a question that Henrik Kra asked, and I'm actually going to ask this one because I'm also curious about it, because we've looked into the digital preservation piece before from the Pure side, just to understand what we could be doing there. We actually have a project that's running or has been running for a while with the JISC group because they were also trying to create a preservation solution. So the question was just, are there providers for digital preservation that we should be looking at, or that you are currently working with that we need to consider? Because we haven't been able to find many ourselves, and maybe we're just not looking correctly or looking in the right places. But that would be a conversation which would be great for us to start up as well, maybe offline. Within the groups as well. And then 2 questions again for Leigh. But I see that we run out of time, so maybe we should table those and ask them later, and then pass back to Tina. I want to say thank you very much to everyone for participating. This was really great.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I should note that we will be saving these questions offline and reviewing them, but you can also engage with the speakers live directly. So if you want to ask the questions to Leah, because I see a lot of the chat questions coming in for Leah, go to the live discussion area. So we've reached the end of the session. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and Shandon and Davina for a great discussion. We're going to now take a real short 5-minute break to transition over to the next session on track 2, which explores again the continuing conversation around, can Pure also be an institutional repository? Thanks, everyone.